Hello, just clearing out some folders. I did a video very similar to this a while back, but it was without narration and with a focus on the Sphinx. So in the background here you can see this is Khafre's pyramid. It's often confused with the Great Pyramid, but you can see how it still has the casing stones on the top. So this is the second highest of the pyramids, and I'll show you the Great Pyramid later. But so we have the Sphinx and the enclosure. It's not the highest res, but we'll get to that later because these walls around the enclosure are important. But just have a look through some historic photos. So here we see a comparison of some of the older photos. Some interesting points to note is the erosion around the neck, how the headdress doesn't completely finish off, and also this gash where we can see on top of the head. And so here, we get some better photos. So there you can see, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but the markings there around the neck, that gash there just above on the left side of its left forehead, and the headdress. And so that's Khafre's pyramid. Once more, there's a note. The pyramid which still has this portion, the casing stone still at the top. That's Khafre's pyramid. Of the three Giza pyramids, that's the second largest. At the moment, it's now the highest, but that's because it's on a plateau 33 feet higher than the Great Pyramid, and because it still has its casing stones. This pyramid is Menkaura's. That's of the three Giza pyramids. We have Menkaura, Khafre's pyramid, and off to the right-hand side, we'd see the Great Pyramid. But again, just these features: the gash, the headdress, and it's a picture from a book, Riddle of the Sphinx, which is it's almost laughable, the energy that they put into preserving the the mainstream story, and some of the excuses they use to describe the weathering around there. But that's something else. Here's another picture. Okay, we get a bit of a profile, not the highest res. Australian light horse, Australian light horse there during World War One. Australian light horse during World War One, and there in the background you can see the southeast corner of the Great Pyramid. Southeast corner is very important because it's the place where we get almost exactly pi proportions from the southeast corner. You have to include double base plus height, but again, Australian forces there, World War One, and the Sphinx pre-restoration, and so we'll have a look a bit more of that. Okay, this is an interest because now we see this is pre-restoration, pre-modern excavation, so you can see how the sand has filled the compound around there. But you can also see these big cracks between these blocks. So they're no longer visible, but this is how the Sphinx was. And a lot of it would be assumed a lot of the pictures we see from the modern era is how the Sphinx was, but that's modern work. Again, some more of the AIF in Australia, World War One, light horse. Okay, so here you can see now they've started to dig out the compound, and that's the Dream Stela. And so what we have is, this is called Khafre's pyramid, and it's usually said that the Sphinx was built by Khafre on the basis of there was some carvings here on the Dream Stela, but the Dream Stela basically had Khaf. Didn't say Khafre, it had a port, and since then it's eroded away. But for the most part, so again, there's essentially no documentation surviving to say that Khafre built the Sphinx apart from Khaf written on the Dream Stela. And well, yeah, what can you say? It's a part of the word was there, and at the very best it says that he did some restoration work on it, but to say he built it, really that's now, so often people said that this is that it's sorted, it's not to be argued. Well, again, if you actually look at the details and the evidence that they use to support that, for instance, they say Khufu built the Great Pyramid based on some painted, crude, misspelt, painted hieroglyphs in Campbell's chamber high up above the upper chamber. Again, there is very small amount of evidence to support the mainstream. Now, I'm not Now, on the opposite side, there's not much, documentation to say that it was built earlier. However, there is some evidence, and we'll look at that later. But just the official story, it's not as solid as what you would, as what most people would believe it was. It's actually very whole. It's like Swiss cheese. Not to say that doesn't necessarily prove it's not true, but there are some very important questions to be asked, and the fact that if you ask these questions, you get shouted down or ignored by the mainstream. And again, but if you interrogate them a little bit further and say, okay, well, where's the evidence of the official story? Again, it really doesn't come together. Not at least not as strongly as what they would suggest that it does. And anyway, that's something. Okay, so more pictures of the Sphinx. And again, now just to plant this in your mind, you can see the headdress. See how it's unfinished? It doesn't run down to the shoulders. Again, we see the headdress doesn't run down to the shoulders. We still have this big gash on the forehead there. And even so, they've excavated in some of these stones here. If you compare them to how the Sphinx looks in modern era, you'll see that there's been lots and lots of excavation work. And go back a moment. Okay, and so here again, so there you see how the Sphinx as it was in terms of the last century and a half, when it was covered with sand, and there are no stones there. It's just the bedrock. Now, if we come to more modern photos, okay, it's a Great Pyramid there in the background, southeast corner. There's the Great Pyramid and a port, so see it's a little bit flat on the top. This is the Great Pyramid. It doesn't have the casing stones on the top. It's again just Khafre's pyramid with the casing stones is okay. Here's a time life picture, and it's important because you get an idea of how disproportionate the head is to the rest of the body. You also get some hint of these holes. There's also one at the tail there. Again, there's some reportage out there which is, well, unfortunate, but let's say, but back to the time of Howard Weiss and Caravaglia, they have well recorded, they did excavations into there. Now those doesn't mean that these are entirely modern, but some of these things are reported as ancient when it's very well recorded that there was excavations done by Tomb Raider Howard Weiss, Dynamite Howard Weiss, who was basically a vandal in so many ways. But again, now also you might notice that these cracks. Okay, so there's no visible cracks there, but if we go back to the earlier pictures, okay, so there you can see how it was, and well, these large sort of cracks there, and how there's been a lot of restoration work done in modern years. Now even around the feet there, but as we get to the more, okay, so now they excavated the compound around there. Okay, so now you see how it looks, and we see the headdress. So, okay, if you remember these portions here, this is all new. Now there's a good reason to support, now that they put these supports in there. Even a lot of this is concrete and other work. Well, as preservation, this was collapsing. It was only because it was buried in the sand that, okay, so there we see how it was without the supports. And we see how it is now. And again, this is Khafre's pyramid in the background. That's the second largest, most important of Giza pyramids. You see the casing stones on there. But so there we see the supports, and also notice that the gash has been filled in there. So there was a bloody big hole there before, and that's been, okay, so there we see again, there's the gash, and how it's been done, how it is compared now. So the gash is gone, they've put these supports in there, and there's been quite a bit of even the stones around the side. We'll look at them in a moment. Khafre's pyramid, but this is an interesting picture as well, because Khafre's pyramid on the equinox, which is so important to the Great Pyramid, but it also connects Khafre's pyramid to the Sphinx, because the sun, on the equinox, the sun sets at the southern edge. So if you're standing here looking in this direction, the sun would set right here on the edge of Khafre's pyramid, right over the head of the Great Pyramid of the Great Sphinx. And just as an example, so we have there's the Sphinx compound, Khafre, Temple of Khafre. There are some interesting. Now the statues don't remain, are no longer there, but the platforms remain, and even the alignment through the Temple of Khafre is an interesting one. But okay, so again now we see so this section here has been, this is all modern. This is all modern reinforcement and supports. And also worth noting, we'll have a look at it a bit later, but you see these lines here. This is the strata of, well, the whole Giza plateau. So these lines, there are different layers of limestone across the plateau there. And so as you dig down, you get to different densities. So this is quite high quality limestone, but you can see there it gets pretty crappy there. And so, well, this was this aided the quarry at the time, because there's quarry sites around there. The blocks have been cut out. It's still there. It's all visible, plainly visible. Should be included in any expose, let's call it, but they don't seem to want to include that information because, well, it's problematic to certain views. But again, so these strata, so there's different layers of limestone, which means as you quarry down, like this layer here, if you were to be quarrying that section, that would just fall off. It's a different strata. It's a different level. It's the way that stone works, and we have different levels of there. But okay, now here's an example. So the profile. This is an important feature. And again, notice the protrusion, the jaw and lips, how they protrude out. Now it's often said to be related to that this is a picture of Khafre. If we go back, we just see that this head is so disproportionate to the body that it's not necessarily 100% proof that it was not the original, but it's a very strong indication, given the precision of everything else that goes into that they would make a tiny little head. Again, not absolute proof, but interesting point. Now that's relevant because as we go to a comparison, so we see, now just to get an older picture of what it looks like, again we see the reinforcement which has been added, so you can even see the strata there, how the erosion and other elements have been eaten away at it. The weaker limestone gets eaten away than the stronger layers of limestone there, and it's often said to be Khafre. Okay, so we'll just ignore this middle picture for the moment, because if we go, okay, so that's a statue of Khafre. Okay, let's try and get all that into the screen. You see the profile of it. Now you compare it to there. These are two different guys. Try and get that all into screen. Okay, so apparently, now, no, I'm not kidding around here. They say that because that there is an actual resemblance between Khafre and that there, that's just bunk. That's just this is not the same person. This is not the same person at all. Here's a comparison of how it is now, where it was before. So you can see again, this has been added. We can see the different strata and how they erode differently. And last off, so Robert Schock, he's just pointed out that this is erosion. This is erosion from rainwater. I mentioned a book called The Riddle of the Sphinx, which I can't remember the author's name at the moment. They go to some effort to debunk the age of that. Robert Schock and other people have pointed out that this geological evidence points to the fact that this compound, this enclosure, is much older, much older than 2500 BC. That doesn't necessarily mean that the pyramids is that old, because if my house is 20 years old, I put in a new driveway, doesn't make my house new, because something is next to one another doesn't equate to equal age. But at the very least, this compound, the enclosure here at the Sphinx, shows these symbols. It's not salt, and the water table, again, that's just anyway. And also, just to get an example, so we see the strata there, the different levels of limestone, which is so important to understanding the quarrying There's quarry sites like literally around there, exactly the same stone built on the pyramid. But anyway, just a quick one. I was just cleaning out some files and hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.